One of the attractions you'll want to stop at on your visit is the Rock of Cashel. It's Ireland's most important historic site.
Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome you to the Rock of Cashel. My name is Katrina and I'll be the guide for the tour, which will last approximately 40 minutes. Now, if at any stage you have questions to ask, please feel free to do so, as we'll be travelling right around the site, so you'll have plenty of opportunity. Now, to give you an outline then to the history of the site itself, the name the Rock of Cashel applies to the whole site and not just to one particular area of it. And it's been quite an important site in Ireland since about the 4th century. From the 4th to the 12th century, it was the residence place of the kings of Munster. Now, the Rock of Cashel was often being attacked, both when the kings of Munster were living here and also when the site was owned by the church. And there's a lot of defence aspects built into the buildings today that we'll see later as we go around the roof. And this is the type of roof that would originally have been in a building like this. There also would have been colouring like this along the roof in the gallery overhead. Now, there's a lot of decoration in Cormac's Chapel. Looking up further from the arches, we have a series of columns going to called a barrel vaulted roof because of its shape. At the top of each column, we have decoration of animal heads and flowers. And actually, each column has its own individual decoration, trying to get as much uniqueness into the chapel as possible. The most important area then of a chapel, of course, is the altar area. Leading up to it here, we have a series of arches. And on one of those arches, we have the stone carved heads, possibly of the stonemasons who helped carve the chapel originally. Now, because our tower was built in the 12th century, it was probably used as a bell tower also. At the very top of it, there are 4 windows, each facing north, south, east and west, and they would have acted as lookout windows, and that would have been the area that the bell was rung from. Now, round towers were very useful as places of safety because once the doorway was sealed, it was very difficult for anybody to gain access to them because it was so high above the ground. There were windows, but they were very, very high above the ground and also very narrow, and nobody could fit through them. They built this very large cathedral right in between the 2 existing buildings in the rock, Cormac's Chapel out there and the round tower out there. Now, they had to use this area as it was the only large space for such a cathedral here on the rock. Now, the type of architecture used here is called Gothic architecture, and that's characterised by pointed arches. If you look up on the square tower there, you can see an example of those pointed arches. They're also over the windows on this wall here, lancet windows. Now, the cathedral originally had a wooden oak roof. If you look up on the square tower, you can see 2 lines of stone showing the height of the roof. On either wall then, about a foot down, there are little stones sticking out. They're called corbels, and they were rests for the roof supports. Now, the roof of the cathedral was burnt on a number of occasions during attacks. In the 15th century, the Earl of Kildare came to Cashel. He attacked the rock and burnt the roof of the cathedral, and his excuse for doing so was that he thought the Archbishop of Cashel was inside at the time. Obviously, he didn't get on very well with the Archbishop. But they actually repaired it after that. In the 17th century then, in 1647, Cromwellian soldiers attacked the rock and also burnt the roof of the cathedral. But it was again repaired after that attack. But by the end of the 18th century, perhaps the Archbishop thought this building was costing him far too much, and he decided to put his money into a new building down in the centre of the town. Maybe he didn't like climbing the hill also, you wouldn't know. But that particular building was finished in 1786, and it's still used today as the Church of Ireland Cathedral. Now, this high altar area here has been used as a burial place for archbishops over the year. Now, the tower is supported by 4 very large pillars. And on first glance, each pillar looks exactly the same, but actually each one is quite different. Possibly there's a structural reason for this, or maybe the stonemasons just wanted to create something different. Now, these lead up to vaulting. In between that, we have what's called herringbone masonry, because if you look up there, it resembles the back and bones of a fish. If you look to your left and your right, then you can see some of those passageways which are open today. So it's possible to start off at one point and travel up and go through those passageways and go right up into the tower and down the other side and around again. Now, up until about 7 years ago, these passageways were still open to the public, but because of insurance and safety reasons, they've been closed since that time. Now, the Archbishop's Castle here was built right onto the end of the cathedral in the 15th century. But even though it was called the Archbishop's Palace, it wasn't built for comfort. It was built with defence in mind. The window down here at the bottom is very narrow, and up as they get up, the windows do get larger, but even at the very top, they're still quite narrow, so it would have been a very dark building. Also, it probably would have been a very cold building, but they weren't thinking of comfort when they were building it, of defence. Now that's the last building on our tour. So to recap then, on the Rock of Cashel today you have 5 buildings, all dealing with the time when the church owned the site. There are 2 12th century buildings, Cormac's Chapel and the Round Tower, the large 13th century Cathedral and the 2 15th century buildings, the Archbishop's Castle and the Hall of the Vicar's Choral. Now that concludes our tour. If you have any questions, please ask me or any of the other guides at the reception desk. Thank you for your attention and I hope you enjoy your visit to the Rock of Cashel. And you're free to go around the site for as long as you like. When you wish to leave the site then, you go back in through the reception area. Thank you.
Thank you.